Hello and welcome. What future faces those affected by the huge oil spill off the US coast? Has an entire way of life been crippled for the foreseeable future? And that's become the focus now in the 8th week since the Deepwater Horizon offshore oil rig exploded in the Gulf of Mexico, killing 11 and releasing millions of litres of oil into the ocean. The oil giant British Petroleum operated the rig and has been struggling badly to plug the leak. Just last week, the company began diverting some oil to a tanker, possibly 15,000 barrels per day, which is two-thirds of the leak by some estimations, although no one really knows how much oil is spilling into the Gulf Coast. Beyond the obvious environmental damage, loss of wildlife and destruction of the marsh habitat, there's growing concern over how this man-made disaster may destroy a way of life for the many Americans who depend on this habitat for their livelihood. Fishing has been banned in more than 30% of the Gulf, meaning oyster beds are closed and shrimpers have been shut down, and fishing tourism is at a standstill. BP is paying $5,000 a month to each business affected by this crisis, but that doesn't begin to cover the losses many are experiencing. If it's anything like the 1989 Exxon Valdez spill, the impact of this disaster could be felt for more than a decade. On today's show, we ask, does this oil spill mean the end of a way of life in the Gulf of Mexico? And if so, who should pay? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or an email, and we'll take your phone calls on the show as well. Joining me now is Noah Hall, Executive Director of the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center, where he works on precedent-setting litigation and policy development. A visiting professor at the University of Michigan Law School, Mr. Hall is also working on the next edition of the leading casebook in this field, Environmental Law and Policy, Nature, Law and Society. In New Orleans, I'm joined by Dr. Ricky Ott, a former commercial salmon fisherman, as she says, turned marine biologist and community activist. She's experienced firsthand the devastating effects of the Exxon Valdez oil spill and founded 3 non-profit organizations to deal with the lingering impact of that disaster. Dr. Ott's most recent work is Not One Drop: Promises, Betrayal and Courage in the Wake of the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill. I welcome you both to the show, and Noah Hall, if I could start with you, sir. Is there any real clear indication at this stage what damage is being done? All these weeks have gone on. No one seems to have any clear information. Admiral Thad Allen, who's in charge of the cleanup, has given BP a 72-hour deadline for some real transparency. What do you expect to come out of that?
We don't have a lot of information at this point, and that's one of the frustrations for many of the residents along the Gulf Coast. They don't know the extent of the oil spill. They don't know how much oil is gushing out of the well every day and every minute. And nobody knows the full extent of the damages that this region is going to suffer. Really, the story just gets worse and worse every day, and as the weeks go on, we learn more about the extent of the damage. We learn about more people affected, more businesses that are being shut down. So the short answer is no, we don't yet know the full extent, and we probably won't know for some time. But
Noah, can you give me any kind of view on the way BP has handled what's been going on so far? It seems that it's been very tough to get information out of the oil company, and the way it's been dealing with the spill as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of frustration towards BP about how they've handled the spill, but it's very hard to figure out where that frustration should be properly placed and where it's just pointing fingers. We don't yet know what exactly BP has done or what they've done wrong in terms of responding to the spill. We know that there's a huge disaster. They're the responsible party. So far, I think they've done a pretty good job of accepting responsibility, writing checks, paying for things, and trying to stop the damage. But there's going to be a lot of finger pointing down the road about ultimately whose fault this was and whether BP did enough to respond. At the same time, I don't think the federal government should get a free pass either. The federal government is really where most Americans put the responsibility to ensure that our environment is adequately protected, right, and that companies like BP are regulated and overseen. And I think there's a lot of questions still to be answered about whether the federal government has done an adequate job as well.
We'll certainly have some questions about that coming up as well. I want to bring in Dr. Ricky Ott here, and thank you for being on the show, ma'am. And you've dealt with this before to some degree, in the sense that you've experienced firsthand what happened in 1989 with the Exxon Valdez spill. How do you compare the two? I know they're different kinds of spills, but you've dealt with the consequences. Is it really possible to measure the full extent of the damage that takes place with this kind of disaster?
Well, two things. One is that the response is playing out exactly the same as it played out in Alaska. BP is taking extraordinary steps to minimize its liability by restricting cameras, restricting them in the air, restricting the media on the beaches, restricting even the fishermen going out with cell phones. There have been a lot of reports from whistleblowers in the Coast Guard, from commercial fishermen coming in, reporting birds uncountable because they're all tangled up on the barrier islands. Dolphins dead as far as you can see. I mean, these reports are coming in. Also, we're hearing reports now of the dispersant spraying not only offshore but onshore. And this is what we tried to stop in Exxon Valdez. Dispersants are chemicals that need a huge volume of ocean to dilute the toxic effects. And what we have inshore is there's no ocean. Right. So there's immediate problems.
Well, Dr. Ott, Noah Hall was saying how that, you know, the federal government shouldn't get off this lightly either. Based on what you've experienced, I mean, what do you think the government of the United States should be doing right now?
Allowing media access, allowing the agency that oversees worker safety to go out on to the spill response where the workers are actually working, measure the air quality, measure the exposure levels that the workers are being exposed to. Also, do this unencumbered from the other federal agencies. This is one federal agency is charged with worker safety, and it's not being allowed to do its job. It's getting misinformed. So it's not, for example, requiring respirators. We did this in Alaska. Hard hats, don't cut it. These people need respirators. And as far as measuring damage, NOAA, another federal agency, should be out there now. In Alaska, this federal agency was charged with monitoring ecosystem effects for 8 years after the Exxon Valdez. Okay, well, let me get. And we need this.
Sorry, ma'am. I'm going to get back onto some of these issues because you're raising a lot of interesting issues here. But I want to hear what Tony Hayward, the CEO of BP, has been saying in a widely shown video. And BP has been very aggressive with its policy of trying to get its message out there. And this is part of what he had to say.
We will honour all legitimate claims, and our clean-up efforts will not come at any cost to taxpayers. To those affected and your families, I'm deeply sorry.
Tony Hall, all legitimate claims. I mean, BP has a lot of legal resources, but also has a lot of financial resources. To what extent is it going to meet its responsibility?
Well, legally, they're on the hook, and they're going to be paying the bill. And there hasn't been much dispute about that. And frankly, I think BP should be commended for stepping up to the plate, at least right now, and acknowledging that they're legally responsible and that they're morally responsible for this disaster. And I know that BP is taking a lot of criticism right now and is very unpopular in the Gulf region. But ironically, to some extent, we're fortunate that it's a company like BP with the financial resources to pay for the cleanup that's responsible here. If this were a small company, a fly-by-night operation, a mom-and-pop shop, they wouldn't have the financial resources to write the checks that are going to be needed to pay for the cleanup, the response, and all of the damages.
But of course, there's been the issue of the $75 million cap on any potential compensation.
Yeah, the $75 million cap, I'm glad you brought that up. It's really a non-issue. The $75 million cap, first of all, does not apply to the billions of dollars that BP is likely going to spend responding to and cleaning up this oil spill. Those costs are not subject to the cap. Further, the $75 million cap doesn't apply if BP is shown to have been negligent or violated any federal health and safety regulations, which is almost a certain likelihood. So I don't think the $75 million cap is going to be an issue here. And frankly, for all of the politicians who are running around and saying we need to do away with the $75 million cap, they're distracting the public from the real issue.
Dr. Ott, let me ask you about the based on what you've seen in terms of how big business responds to these kind of issues. BP has, of course, a lot of financial resources to deal with the spill and to deal with potential compensation claims. What fear do you have, perhaps, that BP could deal with the sort of media hoo-ha right now, put out the money it needs to, but then down the road start to look at a much more coherent legal strategy to pull back?
When BP says we will pay for all legitimate claims, we heard that from Exxon 4 days after the spill. And what that is, it's a one-way ticket to a court, the U.S. justice system, a court of law, a lawsuit. Because who decides what's legitimate and what isn't? And in Alaska, we ended up fighting Exxon for 20 years over legitimate claims, what was legitimate and what wasn't. And also, BP is probably going to write this off as a taxpayer, as a tax expense, cost of doing business. This is what Exxon did. There's no reason why BP wouldn't do it. So I think we're going to have this disappearing act and pull back.
And actually, Dr. Ott, in the case of the Exxon Valdez spill, the company was fined, was it $150 million? But the court forgave $125 million based on its cooperation with the proceedings. Now, of course, that leaves, if BP is cooperating very heavily now, it can argue the same thing, can't it?
It certainly can, and I think it's going to pursue exact same avenues that Exxon used. And in the end, we'll see who really pays are the environment and the people in the communities.
Now, Hall, an email came in from a viewer, if I may put this to you, sir. This is from Abdi Wahab Ali, who says, BP is responsible for failing to put measures to avert a crisis of this magnitude, while the US government is responsible for abandoning their oversight role. Now, you know, just it's a thought, years on down the road, you know, where do you think the real sort of finger of blame is going to be pointed? Because it comes down to also, as you mentioned, the issue of regulation of what the companies are able to do. Everyone seems to be in a scramble to get the oil out. But in terms of safety and regulations, what's missing?
Well, first of all, your viewer's email, I think, is spot on. There's a shared responsibility here between BP for not taking adequate precautions and the federal government for not adequately overseeing and regulating BP. But there's a much bigger underlying issue here. Americans want cheap energy and cheap gas. Politicians have known that for years. We want cheap prices at the gas pump. We don't want the cost of fuel to be a burden on our lifestyle or our prosperity. And so there's been tremendous political and economic pressure to drill as much oil as possible from any resources we have available, especially domestically. Where this is going to play out, it remains to be seen. I don't know if the United States is really going to make any fundamental changes in how we drill for oil, how we use oil, how we conserve oil, and how we regulate oil companies as a result of this spill.
Well, so I'm going to ask you both to stand by. We have to take a short break now. When we come back, what can be done to make sure this never happens again? Or is Noah Hall right in saying the global thirst for oil may be too much? More of our discussion when we come back. Welcome back. We're looking at the environmental crisis in the Gulf of Mexico as the BP oil spill passes the 50-day mark. And joining me are Noah Hall, Executive Director of the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center, and Dr. Ricky Ott, a marine biologist and community activist. And our caller is, we have a caller on the line from the UK. Mahmoud, what would you like to ask?
Well, I would like to ask, the technology nowadays is so advanced. I can't understand that after so many days, BP is unable to seal the leak in the ocean of the floor.
Right. Actually, Dr. Ricky Ott, looking at how much time has gone by, I mean, I know that the implications of Exxon Valdez went on for years, but when you look at the actual cleanup and the process that's been taking place, you've seen what happens out there in the actual on-site. Why, with technology the way it is, isn't there a more effective way to deal with this, do you think?
In the United States, we use a process for listing products that can be used in an oil spill cleanup, and that process basically involves the federal agency rubber stamping what the industry wants. And so this is why we see the industry using boom, burning, and dispersants, things that were used 21 years ago in Exxon Valdez. They didn't work then, they're not working now. And it's the approval process, the listing process, that needs to be changed. And this actually adds up to your question about why is the U.S. obsessed with cheap oil? Are we going to stay the course, or are we going to actually alter our energy future? And in the U.S., we actually use a cost-benefit analysis to determine if the benefit from industry is worth the cost or the risks. And that equation only works when the costs are truly and honestly counted. And what we've done in this country is we've foisted a lot of the costs off onto the environment, like what we're seeing now, onto our communities, like in Alaska, we're still paying for this, and what we're seeing in the Gulf, onto the workers, and also onto public health. There are now, the occupational and environmental medicine doctors are aware that low levels of oil, such as are found in our urban air traffic, are actually causing asthma in children and adults. So until we honestly add in the costs, I'm concerned that we're still going to be thinking oil is so cheap. It's not.
Noah Hall, it's actually quite a complex web when it comes to the monies involved. We've got the lessees involved here. BP actually is just part of the equation. We have the government getting 19% royalties off the oil and gas that is generated too. There's a demand for income, of course, because the government's pretty strapped for cash. How is this going to play out when you look at really where the buck stops? There's the government, BP, and the lessees all involved here.
Yeah, there's a tangled web, like you said, of parties involved in this, and that's typical in complex oil drilling operations. You've got British Petroleum, you've got Transocean, who actually own the doomed rig, even companies like Halliburton that were involved in cementing the well, and as you pointed out, federal government, state governments involved. So far, BP has basically allowed itself to be the point company, to take responsibility and to basically say the buck stops with them. I don't know if that will continue down the road. I expect during the lawsuits that we're going to see over the next years and decades, BP is going to be looking to bring in other potentially responsible parties to share the liability burden and help write the checks to all the victims of this disaster.
We've got a call on the line from DC. Aaron's with us. Aaron, what would you like to ask? Go ahead, Aaron, in DC. I will try to get back to Aaron in a second then. Dr. Ott, let me ask you about the plan that President Obama has announced, that he's lifting the ban on short water drilling. I mean, considering what's happening, is that smart, in your opinion?
I don't believe it is. I know the president's under a lot of pressure to produce oil, but what we need to say, to push back and say that he's equally under pressure to protect the environment and to protect these coastal communities. And I really think we need a ban on oil drilling until we get some answers. Who is accountable and how are we going to fix this so it doesn't happen again? Shallow water, deep water, it doesn't matter. We've got regulatory agency capture going on here, and we need to ask some hard questions and find some answers.
Interesting, Dr. Ott, a viewer has just written in from Tanzania. Jeff Nasser, who's watching the show, says, do you feel the 72-hour deadline given to BP to announce its contingency plans is enough time?
BP should have had a contingency plan well before this. So yes, I think 72 hours is enough time. I think BP has plenty of plan A, B, C, and D, and they're pushing forward most aggressively with the plan that it wants right now, which is spraying dispersants everywhere.
All right, let's see if we can get back to Aaron in DC. Aaron? Aaron, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, my question is, why has it taken so long for the federal government to act? And leaving BP to act on itself? I think the federal government should come in with all the resources that they have to actually contain this problem. It's not a BP problem per se. It's a U.S. problem. And I think the federal government has failed to act first. Yeah.
Let me put this to Noah Hall, this issue of the federal government, and also with an email that ties into this as well, please. It's from Faisal Alam in Bangladesh, who wrote in saying, oil companies are so powerful that the public will always suffer at their expense. So long as big oil provides funding to the U.S. government, they will be able to pressure policy. Do you think that kind of pressure has been responsible for the way the federal government's currently responded?
I think that's partly fair, but it's also oversimplifies the issue a little bit. Obviously, oil companies exert tremendous influence over the U.S. federal government. Major contributors of campaign cash, very influential in politics and in lobbying, but it's also more complex than that. Politicians rise and fall with the price of gas at the pump for the American public. And while big oil companies exert a lot of pressure over the federal government, at the same time, no president is going to remain in office or remain popular when prices at the pump go up. Americans really want it both ways. We want cheap gas, but we don't want the environmental impact of the oil drilling, the oil spills, and disasters like we're seeing in the Gulf. I don't know if we can have it both ways, and that's the tightrope, frankly, that President Obama and the federal government have been trying to walk and have been failing at.
Dr. Riz Khan, of course, the people who feel this the most are those who live on the shoreline and see this firsthand and are affected. We've seen the impact it's had on the fishing industry, and you yourself know what it's like. An email has come in from a viewer by the name of Ali J in the UK, who wrote in saying, it's not the end of a way of life. When a disaster of this magnitude occurs, the relevant authorities should work side by side to resolve the issue instead of playing the blame game. But it must be pretty hard for those who find suddenly their businesses shut down and their livelihoods totally threatened or ending, to not want to blame someone.
Well, what the people in the Gulf are seeing is the oil coming ashore, working its way back into the bayous and marshes, and they don't know how long that's going to affect, or what effect it will have on the ecosystem. It doesn't look good. There have been small spills over the past couple decades, and the people are aware that the industry, oil industry, has used dispersants in the marshes, and those are dead zones. There's no life. There's no shrimping. There's no oystering where dispersants have been sprayed. And now we see this starting to occur on a much larger scale. And the people, the first American people, the indigenous people, the little clusters of fishing community, they know that if they have to move, that their life is entwined with the land and their lifestyle. It's more than about money. People are saying, I don't want BP's money, I want my community. If they have to translocate, that it could potentially change their culture, so it could end their lifestyles.
Now, Paul, I've got about, well, just under a minute left, really. I just want to get your perspective on if you really believe there will be true accountability for all of this in the end.
That's a great question. I think that at one level, yes, there will be accountability. BP is going to be writing a lot of checks. I'd ballpark it easily over $20 billion over the next couple years. So to some extent, there will be accountability. BP will be paying. The other companies involved will be paying. The court systems will work. On the other hand, we won't see the true form of accountability in terms of giving people back what they had before the disaster. There are some things that money cannot replace, and those things are going to be lost forever, essentially a price we pay to have cheap oil in the United States.
Well, Noah Hall and Dr. Ricky Ott, I want to thank you both very much for joining us with this debate, and good to have your input.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for being with us. Remember, you can follow the program on Facebook, where you'll find recent shows and upcoming topics. You can also give us your feedback and share your thoughts with our global audience. You can give us feedback on the show and post your comments there too, so don't forget to do that. On the next show, a year after the disputed Iranian elections unleashed a wave of mass protests, what has happened to Iran's grassroots green movement? Has it become a unified opposition party, or have internal inconsistencies and external pressures diluted its momentum? Let us know what you think. Remember, you can always send in questions for that and join us for the live show too. From me and the team, until then, goodbye. We'll see you next time.